Hello, everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new, sorry, one second. Yes. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. Let me tell you what this show is about. This is the show where we like to have real talk about real things. We like to talk about things in education, empowerment, self care. We've done episodes on homeschooling, resiliency. Are robots taking our jobs? What else have we done? Plenty of episodes about living with disabilities, having children with disabilities, and we are going to continue that line of conversation today in regards to disabilities. So today, I am looking forward to this discussion, and I know that I say that in every episode, but I am definitely looking forward to this conversation. So, along the lines of learning disabilities, as we are not sponsored, but as we are a product of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services, we are going to talk about. Oh, I have a note here. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Linda. Thank you for watching. All right, so today we are going to talk about disability accommodations in college. So, this is a popular topic. I know some people know about it, some don't. I definitely want to get to the bottom of this. So, we are going to get into the nitty gritty of this conversation. The topic again, disability accommodations in college. And I am looking forward to this conversation. So let's get into it. So, my guest today, who's going to help me out, his name is Dan Jordan. And let me tell you, Dan is a therapist, author, advocate, and college transition expert, helping parents transition their college bound student with a learning disability, such as ADD, or a mental health disability, into a responsible self advocate and successful college student. Boom. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring him to the stage. Hi, Dan. How you doing today?
How are you, Gabrielle? I'm doing really well. Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you too. All right. So we're having this conversation in the holiday season. So I guess let's bring the joy. Let's bring the festivities. All right. So today we're going to talk about disability accommodations in college, and I see some people watching live right now. So please, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to put it in the chat if you're watching this in real time. All right, so Dan, let's get right into it. So can you just tell us about the the accommodations in college that people with learning disabilities can get?
Wow, that's a really broad question. It's one of the more difficult ones for any disability staff or accessibility staff to actually answer. There's a broad answer which may not satisfy a lot of people.
Should
Which
I
is
give a more specific question, or you want to just go for it?
No, just go for it,
Okay.
honestly. Because it's a question that parents ask a lot when they call or they email disability staff at any particular college. They'll say, what am I eligible to get? And it's a logical question. It's a very curious question, and it's a logical one. They just want to know, can I get some of the same types of things that I had on my IEP that my kid had on their IEP in high school? And that's a logical question, but the broad question is, the broad answer is anything that really kind of means access for your particular student. That's pretty much a broad answer. To get specific, the more common stuff is extended time on tests and um, distraction reduction. So that's really kind of the more typical kind of stuff. But accessibility staff have a hard time answering some of those questions very specifically because they haven't really met your student just yet, and it's really difficult to go ahead and say. There are some things that are a little bit less common, but also deal with some specific disabilities. Like my son has dyslexia, so he has a screen reader, he's got speech to text, text to speech, he's got extended time, and he's got breaks in between tests. So there's a certain amount of time just in case two tests are given on any particular day. So those are some little extended ones, but the basic ones are just extended time on tests and distraction reduction, if that answers that.
All right. So let's dive into that a little bit more.
Sure.
So let's talk about the process. So it's it's time for college. You already applied. What's the next steps? Take us through the steps.
Got it. Great question. Honestly, that is an excellent question. So the first thing that to do is, if you're looking at a college and you're kind of thinking about where you're going to go, you've applied to certain schools. Really, there's two things. One, look at the services that are available at that school, because we know that some learning disabilities come, it's like 40%, 25 to 40%, depends on the statistic and where you get the statistic. But that population with learning disabilities will also have comorbid kind of stuff with mental health, ADD being a big one, anxiety, depression being others. And so when you're looking at those services, you're really looking at what would my student, or what does the student typically want to go ahead and receive? Do they have tutoring? Do they have people helping them out in high school? Do they also have those particular things at college? Academic coaching being a pretty big one, especially if there's some comorbidity with ADD that may be really specific and really important. And so those are available to anyone. So that should be the first step. And also looking at the Disability Services Office specifically to look at what do they offer. Do they have a lot of information up? Is it easy to find? Do they have information about documentation requirements? Where are they located on campus? When can you apply? Those types of things should be things you write down for every school that you're thinking of applying to. And then when you get accepted, because I think early acceptance just happened a couple of weeks ago. I think it just happened. So if you have early
For the
acceptance,
spring semester, right? Early acceptance for the spring.
yeah, it can happen. Yeah. So if you get accepted, right after acceptance, you can start applying for the accommodations, and I would get them as soon as possible. So as soon as you get that acceptance letter, look at the accessibility webpage. You can even call the admissions counselor to actually have them give you the specific webpage if you can't find it yourself. But you should be applying for those accommodations, and that's the next process. So it's applying to college is the first process, and then while you're kind of doing that, looking at the services that you may kind of want, and that you may need. And really, college, any college that you choose should be about the college that you need to be at versus the college you want to be at. So, and if you can combine those two, that's fantastic. That's awesome. You lucked out. The lottery just hit for you. But sometimes services at one will mean something better for a college experience than another school that doesn't, say, have academic coaching. So look very specifically at terms of what would be really important for you. So then when you get to apply for accommodations, there's usually a form to fill out, whether that's something online or whether it's a PDF you have to fill out, take a picture of, send it in by email. And usually there's some documentation that you have to have. And that's kind of where things get a little bit squirrely, because every school has their own different documentation standards. So, and each school, you could apply for 5 different ones. You could have 5 different sets of things, but the process will be generally the same. Fill out a form, send in some documentation, and then you go ahead and talk with one of the staff to figure out exactly what you need in terms of accommodations. That's basically the process. So, and what I found is students with learning disabilities have a really hard time with that third part, which is saying exactly what their experience is with their own disability. That's the hard part for them.
What's hard about that for them?
Pretty much the whole interview, honestly, because we'll ask specific questions. So what is your disability? and they don't know the name of it. I'll ask, have you ever read your eval? Nope. Uh, Tell me what it's like to have whatever it is. And I'll say, well, this is what it is. And I'll ask them, so what's it like for you to experience that? Tell me what it's like for you. Because everybody's different. So if you have a reading disability or a disability in reading comprehension, if I've met one, I've met one. So it's very individualized when you start asking questions. And students just don't know how to answer that question. They don't know how to really describe the day in and day out of what they experience with that. It's honestly, it's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. But that's really kind of gets at some information that K through 12 just doesn't go through. So the important part of a disability is your personal experience with that issue, whatever it is, and how it affects you in an educational setting or even in other settings as well. And so that information is really valuable. And so when you get into the specifics of that, so what's it like? What's your favorite class? What makes that a favorite class? What's your least favorite class? What makes that least favorite class? What types of things do you really kind of get easily? And sometimes for some people with ADD, that's like, hey, I learn hands-on. And other people know I learn really kind of well just by listening. And sometimes it's different. It's a combination of all of that. And so that's not on the forefront of a student's mind, especially students who have learning disabilities. It's not on the forefront of their mind because they're just not looking at it. And the statistics really bear that out. There's a statistic that the National Center for Learning Disabilities put out, and I can't tell you how long ago, but I know it's out there. But it's 70% of students who have a learning disability, once they graduate from college, they no longer think they have a learning disability. So that goes right along with not really kind of thinking about your disability because you don't really think you have one in the first place. It's just a K through 12 thing. This is what I have, K through 12. And I think there's another statistic, National Center for Educational Statistics. They put out another one saying that 48% of parents think that their kid's going to grow out of their learning disability. And well, that relates to the rest. So you have an awful lot of, I think, misinformation about that. And I think it just comes when you have to start talking about something that, one, your parent doesn't think you have, or two, you don't really kind of think it's that big of a deal, and you think you're just going to grow out of it. It's a K through 12 thing. That's a really hard thing to ask someone to really go ahead and describe. And the other 30%, 10% of them don't really want accommodations. The other 20% do want them because they understand they have a disability, but they still don't know how to describe it. And that's a rich, for somebody in accessibility, that is the richness of that experience. That gets into the nitty gritty of what you want, what you need, and why you need it. And that's kind of the information that's really, really important. It's not just what's on your documentation. It's not just what's on your IEP. It's really your particular experience, your student's experience with day in and day out. What's it like to do math? What's it like to do English? What's it like to learn Shakespeare, which is everybody has a problem with? But talk to somebody with dyslexia, and that becomes a very rich experience in terms of what that is. And they'll say, you know what, I understand if I listen to it, that's a lot better. But if I have to sit there and read Shakespeare, yeah, that's not happening. So when you get to college and you have to explain that, well, first thing, you've never been to college. So you just know what you need, sort of. You know what you've had, what's effective for you in that sense. And so it really is, the interview part is an important piece. Sure, the paperwork is good. We know the demographics, what you're requesting, that goes down in the paperwork, but really kind of what you need comes down to that interview with the accessibility staff. And that's really an important piece to the whole puzzle.
So a thought came to me as you were talking. When you say that students have a difficulty explaining their disability to you, I'm wondering if it's because they're usually not the ones advocating for themselves. It's usually the parent. So I'm wondering if that's what it is. Like, it's usually the parents that are talking to the doctors and filling out paperwork and getting whatever medication, and it's usually not the student or it's usually not the child. So
Correct.
it's a different beast when you're in college. You're expected to be independent. So I'm wondering if the difficulty explaining the disability is due to them usually not being the one advocating for themselves. It's usually a parent or a caregiver.
Correct. Even though students are legally responsible or can be invited to the IEP meeting at 14, well, that's your freshman year in high school.
Mhm.
What about middle school, 6, 7, and 8? I know a lot of 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. My daughter just got out of middle school, but her friends are really intelligent individuals, and some of them have learning disabilities, and that's okay. But they're really able to go ahead and participate in those meetings, and they should. But they should participate in them with some kind of background. So before you even get to 14, and you kind of have that legal right to participate in your IEP meeting, you should kind of know exactly what's going on with you so that you can go ahead and participate fully. Otherwise, you're just another person sitting there and it's about you. Like, that's the most important person in the room. It's not your teachers, it's not the administrators, it's not even your parent, it's you. It's the student themselves. They're the most important ones there, but the school isn't telling them the information. Parent is trying to sort of look for a way to go ahead and have them have the information. Um, but talking just in general, so how are your accommodations working? Uh, Kind of not the greatest question to ask somebody. Asking them, hey, what do you know about what your disability is? That'd be a great IEP question. Right in the meeting. What do you know? What don't you know? What are you confused about? Hey, we can give you your eval. Your mom has a copy of it. If you would love for us to go over it with you, that would be a great thing. Let's look at that. But nobody's going over that with them. So the parent doesn't have a process by which to go ahead and back out. The student doesn't have a process by which they can go ahead and jump in to being their own advocate. There's really nothing out there. So, and from what the statistics say, the students don't want the information because they don't think it's really kind of that big of a deal. And some parents just don't really kind of think it's really a big deal either. I mean, that's where you get that 48%. That's half. That's a huge number of people that may not have gotten the information themselves. So I think it's I don't want to blame schools really, but I got nobody else to blame. Really, I mean, there's really nobody else to blame
Mhm.
because if that 48% is a huge number. And how did nobody tell you that this is kind of a lifelong deal here? Like, you're not getting out of being dyslexic. That's not happening. Like, nobody actually said that. Nobody actually said that if you have a reading comprehension problem, you're always going to have a reading comprehension problem. I find that really negligent, to be quite honest. Um, and I think parents just don't have, like, I've participated in my son's IEP meetings. I know what they've asked him. And I'm like, really? I do accessibility. You can't just tell them that, hey, you're going to be an adult. Yeah, you have to advocate for yourself. Yeah, you have to advocate for yourself. How? You want to go over that? That'd be great. How about that? That might be good. So, but that never happened. Like, I'm sitting there going, oh well, if your college, if your direction is college, and he said that since he was 14, since the first time. But he's participated in his IEP meetings forever. But that's a rare kind of thing because of what I saw just doing accessibility when I got to college and got a job in college, right? So I get this job and I'm like, this is awesome, right? It's a great job, but I have to do accessibility. And I'm like, wow, this is really troublesome for these students who have learning disabilities. This is really problematic. Like, it's like pulling teeth. And I'm like, I'm really good at asking questions. I really am. I'm really good at asking questions, but gathering that information is really hard. Finding out why it's hard, I don't know. I that's I blame the school. That's what I blame.
Mhm.
And so I think that's because I've seen it. And nobody asked my son what his thing was. We said it was dyslexia because it is dyslexia. And this is back in the day when dyslexia wasn't even like the Department of Justice hadn't even come out with, hey, you can say dyslexia, it's okay. They hadn't even said that yet. And so it was really something the schools were pushing back on. But for him, we're like, hey, you're dyslexic. This is the reason why you have certain things. We just kept saying it. But the students I encountered didn't have that information. So at the same time, I get this job with doing accessibility and doing therapy on a college campus, and it's fabulous, and I love it. I still love it, but I also see the deficit, and I'm like, that can't happen for my kid. It's just not good. That can't happen for him. I can't have this new kid who's just newly diagnosed with dyslexia and a couple of others, dysgraphia and dyscalculia as well. I can't have that happen to him. I can't see that gap in information, that gap in speaking up for what you need, that gap can't happen for him. I don't want the same thing for him. So came up with, hey, we just have to explain this to you day in and day out. And what works, what doesn't work, what's helpful, what's not helpful. And I think blaming the school is just way too easy, to be quite honest. As much as I'm like, hey, seems really negligent, but I'm on the outside of this. I don't know what administrators go through. I'm rather ignorant to it, but I know what was happening in his IEP meetings, and it was okay. It was fine, but his transition to college was not really exactly what I would like it to be for students who are headed to college. And we know that students with learning disabilities just don't attend college in the same rates as non-disabled individuals, and they don't graduate nearly with the same rate as non-disabled individuals too. So there's a lot of work to be done. And I'd rather focus like who to blame. I don't know. Like I blame the school because it's easy, and I think that's pretty much on target. But that's my opinion. And I'm not an educator. I'm not K through 12. Never been in K through 12. I'm not a teacher. I'm not special ed. So I don't know the ins and outs of that. I'm just a parent, and it's easy to do. And it seems like the easiest thing to do. But the solution is teach them how to advocate for themselves, teach them about their disability, teach them what it's all about, teach them how to navigate college in the best way that they possibly can. So I look for solutions, and that's kind of the reason why I have what I have. It's the reason why I have the book. It's the reason why I wrote it. It's the reason why I have the social media channels that I have and all of that. So it's easy to blame the school, but let's look for a solution.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the schools is one part, but it's also the parent involvement as well,
Right.
right? So, are they explaining to the child about the disability, that they think differently than other kids, and
Right.
so that's why they need all these things. And so I think it's a multi-system thing. So it's schools, it's parents, it's any kind of caregiver, so it's definitely a multi-system thing. And then especially I mean, your college, and I mean, college is, like I said, like you're expected to be independent. So you have these
Right.
students coming in, and you're probably like, what's going on? Right? Because they may
Correct.
not know. So college is a different beast. Like if you were in high school, okay, maybe you would understand a little bit more, but this is college.
Correct. Correct. And I
So there's
think,
a go ahead.
and also learning disabilities run in families too. Dyslexia
Mhm.
runs in my family. Found that out when my son was diagnosed. And then all these other people, extended family, my brothers, my mom, they're like, wow, that sounds like me. And we had no idea that it was even sort of a genetic component to that. So it
Yeah.
can run in families. So you may even have an adult who may not necessarily sort of understand exactly what's going on with their kid, but they know they need some stuff in order to make that work for them, in order to make them make school that much better for them. Okay, that's fine. So I think it is multi-systemic. It's just an easy kind of out to go ahead and just target the school and say it's kind of negligent. I don't know what the schools have actually said. I just know it was said in my kids' IEP meetings, and wasn't up to snuff in terms of advocacy and in terms of information and in terms of finding out what works and what doesn't work for him. So I can just say from that experience, from my experience, but also my education or my experience working with those students, just it was like asking them, "Hey, what's it like to have brown eyes?" Then they're like, "I don't know how to answer that question." Like, how do you answer that question? But it's a hard thing to ask somebody. Tell me about your learning disability. It's a really hard question. But I could ask somebody with ADD, what's it like for you not to be on your medication? Snap. The answers just come rolling right off their tongue. And I want that for every student who has a learning disability. I want that for them. Makes that college transition that much easier because you're going to have to go ahead and ask for what you need.
Yeah. And speaking of that, it's when you get to college, you have to seek out disability services. So it's not like, I don't know if because there might be students that haven't sought your services and they
Correct.
have disabilities. So
Right.
that self-advocacy is a big part of it. So they have to
True.
look
True.
for it, right?
Right. They have
Um,
the right of self-disclosure. That's what that's called.
yeah,
So as soon as they get there, they have the right of self-disclosure. So like K through 12 is under the IDEA. We're under a different section for 504. I think it's subpart E or whatever. So it's 504 and ADA, but those parts just are for us. And the IDEA says, hey, you have to identify students that may have a particular issue. Us, you have to tell us that you have some need. So we're not trying to go ahead and look for people. They have to identify that themselves. So if they have a need or if they think they kind of may have a need, students with learning disabilities will wait sometimes. And that's, I always advocate, don't wait because you always have the right not to use the accommodations.
right.
You have a right not to. But once they're approved, and see, part of this is also when you're applying for multiple schools, you can actually go through this process with every school that you've been accepted to. And then it's a balance between financial aid, where you want to go, what the school's resources are, what you need, and the accommodations that get approved. And so there's a balance there. So as soon as you get accepted, yeah, go ahead and start applying for this, go through this process. And then you can weigh what the accommodations are. Because here's a little secret. We're not bound by your IEP. We're not bound by it at all. We can do whatever we want. We can do whatever is meaningful for that student to have access, which sometimes means we can do more. So we can do things that K through 12 just didn't think about. So sometimes, if it makes sense, we will. So I've had students with 504 plans, let's say, even though we're talking about students with learning disabilities, I've had students with ADD, but it became very clear that they needed some other kind of modification or modification. That's not a word that we kind of use. Some
Mm-hmm.
other kind of accommodation, not modification, because we don't do that. But we can go ahead and accommodate a student in a way that they hadn't thought of. And so for a student with ADD, it may be extended time, but it may be taking breaks with tests. It may be not having tests on the same day. It may be saying, hey, I need sort of a break in between tests on the same day. It may be that they kind of, this is an unusual one, but it's happened numerous times with students with ADD. Reading the question out loud so they keep on track and they comprehend what they're reading so they don't get off track and they comprehend more. All it is just reading it out loud to themselves. Gold. Cool. But I'm hard pressed to find a 504 plan that's ever had that on there. So it's just an example of something that we're about access and whatever that is and whatever that's meaningful for that person. But you have to shop for that. And so a school, you may have to balance that out with whatever school you're actually going to or you want to go to versus what school has the resources to do that for you. And if you go through that process, you get to know what some of those questions are actually about. And so how you describe what's going on with you, it gets better and better. And so each school just may have a different little process that they go through, but it's rather similar. I mean, I can't speak for every college that's out there, but it's kind of a similar process. Determinations and what they ask for with documentation may be a little bit different, but you can always explain sort of what's going on. But I always encourage them, get them as soon as possible, and then you get to decide where you want to go and balance that out between the financial kind of stuff, where it's located, and all the other things that may kind of go into that decision making process. So accommodations is being, I think, for myself, I'm biased, I think it's probably one of the more major ones. People put finances up there, and that I understand. But if you're not skipping a semester because you have what you need, I think we got some financial kind of stuff under control instead of adding on another semester, because you just didn't do so well, because you asked for accommodations in November. You're going to wait. So it's good enough to have them right off the bat, knowing that you don't have to use them right off the bat. But it's good to have, so then when you need to use them, or you're kind of like, wow, October hits. And that surprises every student in college. October hits, and the academic kind of side is really difficult and to manage for many students. And so that anxiety goes through the roof if you have to wait for accommodations and you have to sort of navigate not just the academic side, but knowing that you need things, not really seeing like, where do I do that? How do I do that right now? And then you're playing catch up, and then it's all of that. So if you do it right off the bat, it's that much better for you. And then all you have to do is implement it. Mm-hmm. And then you can see what it's like to implement that. I always encourage students, don't wait. It's never worked out for any student that I've had. Really, I could pick out about the 8 students that have said, I'm going to wait. And I'm like, okay, I'll see you in November. And pretty soon they'll see me in November and they'll be like, I kind of need stuff. I'm like, yeah, kind of thought so. So how'd that work out for you? Not so great. I'm like, cool. All right. Let's use them from here on out. Let's see how your semester turns out. And let's, when you come back in the spring, I'll see them and they'll say, yeah, that was worth it. Okay. So just a story to encourage students who might be listening, or parents that may have students that might kind of say, I don't think I need it. Just get it anyway. Honestly, save yourself the hassle, save yourself the trouble of doing that in November.
It's better to have it than not have it.
Correct, because you always have the right not to use it. But if you wait, you're waiting. I can just tell you that right now. You're just going to wait. So do it as soon as you get accepted.
All right, awesome. All right, so let's get into the process. So
sure.
The student is in the disability office. How does it work?
They're going to look at...
what's the formal process?
Yeah, the formal process is they're going to look over the documentation and see if that's sort of what they need. If they need anything else, they'll tell you. Typically for a learning disability, an IEP is not enough because it just doesn't give you as much information as you need. I can't speak for every school. I know that documentation standards vary from school to school. And even though there's no legal obligation to ask for documentation, it's kind of the school's obligation to make sure that they're doing their job to have some kind of documentation thereof so that they can say, hey, this is somebody who came to me and had this information, and this is what we pursued. And this is what was accessible for them. And so there's a process for that also means that the disability office's main obligation is to make sure that the school is not discriminating against students who are disabled. That's their main obligation, is to make sure that that happens. The process is asking questions, sitting down with the student saying, hey, here's the documentation. And what they look at is, does the documentation have a history of having a disability? Does it point out some things thereof? Is there, well, we have to figure out if there's a disability, first and foremost. And sometimes there can be a disability, but no current impact. So what's the current impact? Well, this is where we get into that interview with the student and say, hey, give me some examples of what's going on and tell me what's going on here. And this is the importance of that interview, is because that's current impact. We can get that information directly from the student. For more complicated kind of learning disabilities where they're just not asking for um, they're not asking for like readers. They're not asking for text to speech. They're not asking for anything complicated. It's a little more complex to intervene with. They're just asking for extended time and some distraction reduction. Okay, well then we may not need as much. And so that's okay. And there are some schools that don't request an awful lot for that. And I think, I'm not sure, I can't speak for every school, but you have to look at the documentation standards that are there. And we'll look at the documentation and we kind of say, hey, uh, where's the discrepancy between what you're experiencing and what we kind of have? And so the easy one is the extended test time. So if it takes you have a reading comprehension issue, well, it takes you longer to comprehend. Therefore, if you're trying to answer a test question the best way possible, obviously you're going to need a little more time for that. So there's a nexus between what the disability is saying and where the discrepancy is and the impact of that disability and the requested accommodation. Does the requested accommodation actually make sense for what they're describing, what they're asking for? Well, in that sense, extended time makes sense. And so we kind of do that for each accommodation. We kind of have that natural discussion about what's going on with you, how it impacts you in a variety of different settings. And then we figure out, okay, is there a disability? Is there a current impact? And what accommodations are going to kind of alleviate those barriers? Where's the barrier that we have? And like I said in the test scenario, the barrier is time. That's the thing. You just need more time to go ahead and comprehend stuff. Okay, great. So then it becomes a question of how much more time. And you get into that and you get into the nitty gritty, and it's a very individualized. So I think part of the law actually calls it the individual. Uh, God, the name escapes me. God, that sucks. But it's an individualized process, is what it comes down to. Whether what the law calls it or not is regardless. It's about the individual. And so if you've met one person with one thing, it's about what makes sense for them. That's why there's no list of accommodations, by the way. So there's no, like, it's not like going to McDonald's and you have a menu of stuff and you're like, I want this, 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 and this. And like ADD gets this, 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 and this. And, depression gets this, 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 and this. That's not how it works. It's very individualized. And so each student is taken for what is meaningful access for them. Like I said, some people with a learning disability just may need extended test time. Some may need extended test time in a distraction reduced environment. Some may need a reader. Some may need spell check. Some may need all kinds of different things. So the more complicated it gets, the more information you're going to need. And that's where it gets a little tricky with a learning disability. Because some schools will say it needs an evaluation within the last 3 years. I don't know of a school that's going to turn you down for that if it's 3 days plus or 3 years plus. So I don't know a school that's going to turn you down for that, although I can't speak for every school, that's for sure. But I'm hard pressed to find a school that would turn you down. But you have to look at the documentation requirements first and foremost, so you know what you're getting into. And so if they ask you for something specific, then you can say whether or not you have that. And so when you're meeting with a student, anytime I'm doing it, the most important thing is what's their experience, and asking questions to tease out that experience and get that experience known so we can go ahead and make a determination as to what accommodations make sense for them. That's basically the process. And then once we have a list of accommodations, we're going through what's next for them. How are instructors notified? What are their responsibilities as a student to either come back every semester? How is the student going to use their test accommodations? What kind of stuff they have in class, if anything? What kind of information do instructors need to know about their accommodations? That kind of stuff. And so that's basically the process. So the student is fully informed in terms of what they have, what's meaningful for them, and also what makes sense in terms of accommodations and how they need to implement that stuff. That's exactly what happens in that process when you kind of have that interview.
So just to clarify, All right, so once you get to the office, so it starts off with you're asking the student a series of questions about the disability. So it's you're framing the questions in a way that they can describe it better. So your questions like what's your favorite subject, what's your worst subjects, things like that. So it sounds like the types of questions you ask is not very direct. It's more kind of you're being creative. Is that fair to say? And the type of questions that you're asking.
Correct. Simply because we have to. Um, I've I think it's a rather common experience for disability professionals to have to get creative in interviewing students, especially if they have a learning disability. You have to get creative. I can count them on one hand. The students that come in say they have a learning disability. This is what it is, and this is my experience with it, and this is what I need. I can count on one hand. Um, and so that's what I want for every student with a learning disability to walk through the door. Here's what it is. And that makes it so much easier. The self-awareness is there too. So it's that process of self-awareness. And so you're teasing out some functional questions and getting at functional information about their experience. And so that's why we ask questions. What's your favorite class and why? What's your least favorite class and why? Usually, if I ask that question to somebody with a reading disability, it's because the more heavily the classes that are more heavily influenced with a lot of reading and more complicated information, okay, well then that makes an awful lot of sense to me. And so you see the functional sort of issues that get teased out when you ask a question like that. But you have to ask the question. Not that I would ask a different question. I'm still asking questions, of every student in pretty much the same way. Um, but it's a lot easier, and a lot easier for students once they know themselves and know what works for them and can speak on that with clarity and consistency and some confidence. It's easier for them to go, hey, you know what, this is they're not afraid to ask for tutoring, let's say. They're not afraid to say, you know what, I feel a little bit more depressed at this particular moment. Maybe I need to go and talk to somebody. I just had a death in the family as some close relative. Maybe I need to talk to somebody about that. Or I'm confused about something in class. Maybe I need to go talk to my teacher. Very underutilized kind of thing, instructor office hours. They love meeting with students. They just do. Um, but it makes it that much easier to go ahead and say, hey, I'm really confused about what was going on in class. Can you explain this to me? It's a lot easier to do if you kind of have that self-awareness and you're used to being okay with,
Yeah.
this is not really sitting well with me right here. Okay, fine. Now we know, and now you can go ahead and ask for that. That self-awareness is really important. And so that's where that awareness doesn't happen sometimes for some students. So but it relates to them being able to go ahead and advocate for themselves in other realms, in other kinds of situations, academically at school.
Hmm. So after you do your questioning, then there's the documentation. So you do require documentation. You do require something like an IEP or I guess a letter from like a psychiatrist or a mental health counselor, something like that. What types of documentation are appropriate? I mean, obviously the IEP is
Gotcha.
one, but what other types of documentation?
Well, if we're talking about different things, each one will have a different category. And this is why doing your homework with looking at the web pages for each disability office at each school is really important. So you kind of know what documentation is appropriate for what category that you're talking about. And so with learning disability, typically it's the evaluation and or the IEP. So some schools, not everyone, but there are some schools that will go ahead and just take your IEP. There are. It's not a lot. It's an upcoming trend. There are some places that will go ahead and do that. You have to really kind of go ahead and look in terms of what they're asking for. So for learning disability, it's IEP and evaluation. That's really what they're looking for. For a mental health issue, that could be you have ongoing therapy, so you get a letter from your therapist. You could just go ahead and see a psychiatrist. You just are on medication management, and so you just see a psychiatrist. Okay, well that's okay. We can get that information from your psychiatrist. There might be a form for them to fill out that the school has that you can easily go ahead and give to them. Um, and so that's something that they can fill out. That's also a really good thing. Um, and so ADD, that might be something that you have the same. You might see a psychiatrist. You may even see your primary care physician for that, and you just get meds from your primary care physician for what those things are. But that's something that it needs to be very specific for the documentation requirements for that school, so you can meet that requirement that the school has. And that might also come down to which school you're actually going to go to, because you just might not be able to meet that documentation requirement. Again, I can't speak for every school, but I know that those documentation requirements can be rather specific, especially for ADD. Some places are asking for a neuropsych eval. I'm a therapist. I can diagnose somebody with ADD. Why are you not taking it? So you have to do your homework for that. And really know what the school is really looking for, and do that ahead of time, so you can go ahead and make your determination in terms of what school can meet your need, and give you the accommodations that you kind of really require, to have access. But it really starts with doing that homework for that, and every school will have somewhat of a different kind of take on things. I can't really speak for every college, like I said, but there are some schools that have documentation requirements that are rather very specific. Okay, then you have to meet those. And so each one will have a slightly different thing. And if you have both, more information is better. So if you have a learning disability or you have ADD and ADD, then information on both will be really important. And so I encourage students to go ahead and give as much information as they have regarding those comorbid kind of conditions. So you may have ADD, but you also may have anxiety. You may have dyslexia, but you also maybe have depression. So the more information you get, the more information disability professionals can rely on in order to make their determination. Sometimes the accommodations for either a mental health thing or whatever else is going on with you once they meet with you and talk, sometimes the accommodations are going to be the same. But you won't know that until you actually go through that process.
Mm. That's definitely a lot to factor in there. And I have, so many more questions about all this, but we got to start to wind things down. So we got to schedule a part 2. So now, so we're going to bring it down a little bit. We're going to see if we can schedule a part 2 together. Yeah. So do you have any words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience? Anything that, you want people to know that they don't really know, or there's a point you want to emphasize that people don't really seem to get, or, whatever you want to share.
Yeah, got it. Thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate that. And thanks it is rather a complicated set of circumstances. So part 2, more than happy to come back and do part 2. Because I know we didn't get to every question that possibly even, your audience may even have. Words of wisdom. Here's the thing. College is definitely different. It's entirely different. And so your student doesn't know that because they've never done it before. They may have expectations that are a little bit more, they may not have accurate expectations because they've never done it before. But it's literally the difference between riding a bicycle and riding a motorcycle. Just because both have to do at school doesn't mean that just because you did one, you know how to do the other. It's entirely different. The academic standards are different. The academic pressures are different. And the needs are probably greater. Can it be successful for students with disabilities? 100%. Absolutely. See it all the time. And students that you kind of like look at and you're like, wow, that's a lot of stuff. That's an awful lot to overcome. It's a really profound issue. And they succeed and they thrive. Why? Because they have what they need. And they're aware of what they need and they're not afraid to ask for it. So having that coming through means that transition, especially for the first semester is all about going ahead and figuring out, how do I do school? How do I do college? That's it. It's not about high school. It's not about what work there, because what work there may not even work in college at all. So you may have to learn some different stuff. But that first semester can go a lot better if you have what you need and you're willing to go ahead and learn about how to be a college student for yourself. That's individualized as well. But the struggle is real for everybody. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say October hits and everybody goes, what's going on? Yeah, that's true for pretty much everybody. But if you have a disability, that makes it that much harder, especially if you don't have what you need. If you have what you need and you know how to use what you need, then you can go ahead and have an easier time with that. And when October hits, you're fine, right? Um, Also, some other things, make sure that you have a study routine, make sure time management is there, and you use your time in ways that are effective for you. So that's really important. So when you hit a college schedule where you have Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, you got 3 classes separated by an hour apiece, and you're done by 2 in the afternoon. What are you doing with the rest of your day? And on Tuesday and Thursday, you got classes only in the morning and you're done. Okay, what are you doing for the rest of your time? That's a schedule that's really different for especially for students with disabilities. Really different because you're structured pretty much 7:30 to 2:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And now you don't have that. Okay, how are you going to structure your time? This is where the services come into play and where academic coaching may be one of the more important things. This is where those services come into play. But it's also one of those things where if you're willing to go ahead as a student to learn how to do that for yourself and walk that walk, which may be difficult at times, if you're willing to do that, it makes that semester go that much better. And when you learn how to be a college student, it makes the spring semester that much better. Is it doable? 100%, but you got to be prepared for it.
All right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing those words of wisdom. All right. So we're just going to jump ahead to your promo. All right, you guys. So Dan Jordan, you can find him online. His website is accessingcollege.com. You can also find him on his Facebook page. It is just Assessing College. Assessing College, that's the handle. Instagram is also Assessing College, but there's an underscore. So it's Assessing underscore college. So I encourage you to, check out his website, learn more information about his services, go to his Facebook page, go to the Instagram page, follow him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram, learn anything and everything there is to know about his services and everything that he has to offer. Dan, can you tell us more about your services? What exactly do you do?
Yeah, my services are all about that first semester, basically, that transition to college. And so it's a lot about what we're talking about, which is, how do I get accommodations? What do I need to do in order to make that happen? How do I transition out of being a main advocate as a parent and have my kid transition into being their own advocate with that? So solving those problems that we've talked about, which is getting more information about your own disability to make that happen in the easiest way possible. And can it happen? 100%. And I can say that, that's the reason why I wrote the book. The programs that I have, up on my webpage, on my website, are all there and geared towards that. It's college transition, making sure you can advocate. Time management is really specific, especially for students with disabilities. It's more important, I think. And once that gets down, that's really good. Test anxiety, that's another issue, big one for lots of students, whether you have a disability or not. But it does occur a lot with students who do have disabilities. And so that's there. My blog is also an easy place for people to get more information. I I write about the stuff that we're talking about: college transition, paperwork, documentation, all these kinds of things. So those things are there. Um, Instagram is just an easy thing for people to get in touch with me. It's really easy. Not that you can't email me. You can certainly email me. I'm certainly available for that. But it seems easier for people just to DM me and just be like, "Hey, I have this issue. What do you think?" That's really kind of an important way for just getting that outreach. And it's just a quick way of giving people information as well. So it's all there. And I do have some free things for people, like the checklist. Also, I have a checklist for that, for going ahead and doing that interview. What do I need to do once I've chosen the school to go to? Once I've been accepted, I have a checklist for that. Also have a checklist for checking stuff out, especially when you do a college tour or you're thinking about going to a school. What services do they have? How do I navigate all of that stuff, and what do I need to kind of think about? So those things are there. And it's all just to make sure that you can have an easier transition to school and be as successful as you possibly can be.
Fabulous, fabulous. All right, I want to make sure that we get to this. You also have a book called Self-Advocacy for Higher Education, a step-by-step guide to preparing to request accommodations in college. You could purchase that book on Amazon. So tell us about your book.
Yeah, that came about as something that when I was speaking about my son being first diagnosed and getting my job in college right around the same time, those issues that are really common for students with learning disabilities were pretty apparent all the way through, even my last semester doing accessibility. And my colleagues that do accessibility work were experiencing the same stuff with students that have learning disabilities. So it solves that problem. Like I said, parents have a way of transitioning out of being the main advocate and now have a way of teaching their child to go ahead and be more self-aware about their own disability. And it walks them through all those particular things, like what's the name of your disability? What documentation do you need? How do you read it? What parts are really important for you? How do you navigate your accommodations? What works for you? What doesn't? Why doesn't it work for you? Why do they actually work for you? What else do you possibly need? And it walks you through going ahead and requesting those documentation or requesting those accommodations for college. It's all the stuff that I was working on with my son, to make sure that he was really well prepared for college, just from the deficits that I saw from K through 12. So it kind of solves that problem, and it fills that gap. And I was quite happy to be able to write it, and it's the easiest way for people. It's pretty inexpensive, and it's an easy way to go ahead and become a great advocate for yourself. If you're a student, you're listening to this, it's a great way for you to go ahead and learn more about yourself so you can get what you need no matter what. And I think another offshoot of that is, once you kind of know, now if you have children, you have your own family, and something, maybe they have a learning disability as well, now you know what to do. Now you know what to say. Now you know something better. And so you're changing not just yourself, you're changing the next generation. You're correcting an awful lot of problems. So that's the reason kind of why I wrote the book. So.
All right, amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for giving your book to the world. And you guys, once again, you can purchase that book on Amazon. So go to Amazon.com and get that book. Forgot to mention that the link, the specific link to the book on Amazon, we will provide in the description. So check out the description. I mean, you can also just type in the title and it'll just pop up.
Yep.
But, just for convenience, we will provide the link to the book in the description, as well as all of his, both of his social media accounts and the website, which is scrolling below for the video people. The audio people, I didn't forget about you. All of this stuff is in the description. So either way, you have access to this information. And I encourage you to follow him on Facebook, follow him on Instagram. And if you want any of those services, check out his website and reach out to him. All right. Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me today. This was very informative.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the time, and thanks for inviting me on. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, of course, of course. Right, I will place you off camera now. All right, you guys, it is just you and me. Where's my thing? Okay, there we go. All right, you guys. So we have reached the conclusion of yet another episode, you guys. We've been doing this for a while now. I want to say episode 166. I think that's where we are. So we are going and we are going strong. And thank you for your continued support of Hot Topics. So thank you for joining us, whether you've joined us before or you are new to the podcast. Thank you for joining us. And we have reached the ending of yet another episode. So thank you again for joining us. So I just want to remind you guys that Hot Topics is a production of my company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, Dan was just talking earlier about tutoring. Listen, we tutor college students too, right? So I'm going to switch my ending message up a little bit. I'm going to direct this message to college students. So if you are a college student, whether you have a disability or you don't have one, we offer tutoring services to you. We also work with college students as well. So I encourage you to seek our services. So if you need test prep, one-on-one tutoring, editing and proofreading, listen, we also do college counseling. Listen, so I'm directing this message to college students. So if you are in college, listen, hit us up. Our tutors are available for you. You can reach out to us. Our website is www.astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You can also reach out to us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, Eventbrite, and WhatsApp. So hit us up on our social media and follow us as well. Stay in touch with us. You can also send us an email, success@astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You can also call us. Our phone number is 347-762-2838. So there's so many ways that you can reach out to us. I encourage you to reach out to us today if you need those tutoring services. And again, I will give you the website. It is www.astepaheadtutoringservices.com. I also encourage you to let me know what you thought about this episode today. Drop a comment in the comment section, drop a rating, drop a note, drop something. Let us know what you thought about this episode. Leave a comment in the comment section, in the comment thread. If you're listening on audio, whether it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio, drop a rating. Let us know your thoughts about this episode today. We definitely want your feedback. All right, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to you joining me at the next episode. Thank you guys. Let me get my closing video ready. All right, you guys. I will see you next time. Thank you guys. Signing off now. Bye.